Syndicate marks an important milestone in my journey to play through the entirety of the mainline Assassin's Creed games, as this was the first game in the series that I did not buy on release. I had given up partway through Unity and felt no enthusiasm for the series anymore. To say Unity was disappointing to some people is an understatement, as it can be argued that the failings of that game led to many people feeling the same way I did and giving Syndicate a miss, which led to them giving the franchise a rest for a year so they could make drastic changes to the series, but we'll get onto that in the next video. Over the years since, I've heard various reviewers and commenters saying how Syndicate is actually pretty good and people should give it a chance. Now that I've completed it, I can say that I do agree with this sentiment, but there should be a huge asterisk to go along with that remark. I mentioned in my last video that Unity should have been held back a year. Ubisoft released 2 full-size Assassin's Creed games on the same day, and it's fairly clear that they rushed development on Unity to do so. Syndicate is what Unity would have been had they given it another year in the oven. The parkour, combat and stealth is tighter here, not tight, just tighter, and they have reverted many of the negative changes that Unity introduced while keeping the better parts of it. Sounds like it should be an awesome game then, yeah? They even course corrected after the gender-based controversy caused by Unity's multiplayer mode. In Syndicate, we play as both Evie and Jacob Frye, 2 lovable scamps who tire of wasting away their lives murdering Templars in smelly old Crawley when they could be murdering even more Templars in glamorous London town. After a brief introductory mission where their characters are firmly established and shall not change for the duration of the game, they scarper off to London against the orders of their mentor to help fight the big bad Templar called Starrick, who we know is bad because of his big twirly moustache and his penchant for putting children to work in dangerous conditions. He also seems to be solely responsible for all the bad things you've ever heard about the Victorian era. Upon meeting Henry Green, seemingly the only assassin in London, he tells the siblings all about the evil Starrick and how he controls pretty much the entire city by way of controlling the local gangs. Jacob, the lovable scamp, decides to start his own gang called the Rooks, which he took so little time to think of that I imagine he must have been drawing logos for his own gang on his books during assassin school. With this new gang, Evie and Jacob can systematically liberate the boroughs of London from Starrick's control and establish their own power base to take on the Templars. If I were feeling generous, I'd suggest that this is a callback to the criminal gangs we saw in Assassin's Creed Rogue, but Peaky Blinders was big news around the time this game was being made, so I imagine that was a bigger influence on this aspect. Fairly soon, they learn about a piece of Eden that the Templars are looking for. It turns out that our old friend Edward Kenway, the bloke from that one game we all love, discovered the Shroud of Eden, which can offer its wearer powers of restoration and healing. Also, it apparently allows the control of floating balls that project deadly laser walls for some reason. Evie and Henry set about trying to track down the Shroud, while Jacob murders his way through the various industry heads of London, almost destabilising the entire economy in the process. After several hours of stabbing gangsters and liberating child workers, Jacob and Evie do battle with a Shroud-equipped Starrick, and through the power of cooperation manage to defeat him, locking the Shroud back inside its precursor tomb, the location of which is what the modern-day story is focused on learning. Similar to Unity, it feels like Ubisoft was stalling for time on the modern-day story here, though some sort of narrative is at least offered in this game. Through a series of pre-rendered cutscenes, we see Sean and Rebecca evading the 2 Templars from Rogue and their boss as they search for the Shroud. They need us, who I assume to be the same computer game playing nerd from the last game, to carry on working through memories to help locate it. To be honest, this is probably the best way of handling the modern day stuff at this point, through skippable cutscenes. It has absolutely zero effect on the historical gameplay, and while it does continue the narrative established in previous games, people who give absolutely zero shits about it can give it a miss entirely. I thought it was weird having pre-rendered cutscenes when historically the series has used in-game animations, and the weird clone reveal at the end of the game came completely out of nowhere and seems like an idea the writers came up with just as they were leaving for lunch break. We do get some precursor content here though, and what I believe to be the first use of the word Isu in the series, but I'll come back to that later. In terms of story, there's not really much to get stuck into here. There are no real surprises or twists, other than with one character that happens about 30 minutes after meeting them and is as obvious as a fire dancer at a funeral. This is back to basics good versus evil storytelling. We get introduced to the two playable characters and their boss / awkwardly forced love interest. They get pointed at the bad guy and off they go, never meeting or really interacting with each other until the big fight at the end. The narrative is split between many memory sequences, with each sequence containing its own little story based around another underling of Starrick. We get a short cutscene explaining what they're doing, like producing and distributing poison, and we're given an outline of what Jacob and Evie need to accomplish separately to bring an end to these activities and kill the person running it. This made it feel like episodic entries in a TV program, and provides very little time for us to get invested in any of these subplots, as the mini-bosses are being killed shortly after they're introduced, so I didn't really feel anything when I finally landed the killing blow. We, the players, check in with Starrick at the end of each sequence, watching as he transforms from thinking nothing of the Frye twins to acting all crazy-like and shooting his servants in anger. Almost like Azula from The Last Airbender, losing their minds as they suddenly find themselves on their own thanks to their own negligence. Given the context of the narrative, that we are witnessing genetic memories of the Frye twins, I do wonder how we are able to bear witness to private Templar meetings. Now that I think about it, how can we witness the genetic memories of two siblings? I guess we aren't supposed to think about it too much because the only explanation I can think of is illegal in most countries and would result in webbed toes. I am personally not much of a fan of the Frye twins, at least not as a pair. Jacob to me feels like he was designed by a committee of wankers who think that being a twat is charming. He's also seemingly irresistible to older women, with the Prime Minister's wife having to carry around a wet floor sign whenever she meets him. Evie is much less grating, and to my mind would have been fine being the sole protagonist. When they're together, they have this really annoying energy about them. They fall out at the end due to their different approaches to situations, and I felt no sympathy for Jacob as we've seen how short-sighted he is and how much damage he can cause. I think we're supposed to feel despair when they agree to work one last job together and then part ways. But honestly, that seems like the best solution, and I was glad they finally figured that out. They then changed their minds after that last job though. The lovable scamps. They also spend very little time together on screen. There are plenty of cutscenes featuring the both of them at the start of the game, and then they never really interact until they fall out right at the end, making this argument feel a bit sudden. You can swap which sibling you're controlling at any point in the open world, and certain missions require specific characters, so they don't spend much time together, they just talk about each other. Or rather, Evie bemoans Jacob's actions while he tries to swoon the G-MILFs of the capital. The story and characters did very little for me here. Evie and Henry end up in a relationship because they spent 3 or 4 cutscenes together, and I think Alexander Graham Bell quite fancies Jacob, but nothing comes of that. On that note, the out-of-nowhere introduction to historical figures is just as out of the blue and unsubtle as I had heard about this game. Within 5 minutes of arriving in London, you literally bump into Charles Dickens, who, without any form of conversation, invites you to drop by his house at some point to hunt supernatural beasts. We also meet Charles Darwin, who comes off as some sort of violent anarchist, Florence Nightingale shows up for one mission, and Queen Vicky makes an appearance at the end and almost exclusively talks about cake. Karl Marx makes an appearance in some side missions, and there are other characters introduced in a manner that suggests they too might be real famous people, but it let my mother down to admit I didn't know who they were. Sorry, Mum. Instead, it's the gameplay what kept me entertained throughout my time with Syndicate, and as I mentioned earlier, this is what Unity could have been if it had been given more time. In fact, there were many things this game does that made me dislike Unity even more, because this is how it could have been. That said, this is by no means perfect, and I once again found myself shouting at the Frye twins the same way I shout at the cat when she tries to steal fish off our dinner plates. The up and down parkour controls are tighter than Unity, but they did still result in said pet-like shouting. Sometimes I wasn't sure whether I needed to hold the button to go up or down. For instance, a waist-high railing surely needs me to go up, but because it's on top of a wall, I actually need to hold down, otherwise I just stand there looking at it while my target runs away. The combat system is very similar to Unity, but again it's tighter, more consistent, with more clear visual indicators, and the camera didn't once swing into a wall and block half of my view. I do have more to say about the combat, but I'm just talking about positive things at the moment, so we'll come back to that later. Stealth mechanics have been changed a bit here from Unity. We can still crouch, and they gave us the whistle back. Hooray! But they didn't include the whistle range thing from Rogue. Boo, why the hell not? There's no button to stick to cover anymore, but while this automatic cover method largely worked fine in the older games, here it did feel quite inconsistent. The skill tree is back and substantially expanded. The skills are identical for both twins, except for a few high-end skills at the bottom of the trees which are unique to each sibling. I much prefer this skill tree to the Unity equivalent, as I didn't need to spend precious points to unlock basic abilities like sitting on benches. Though sitting on benches does appear to be omitted in this game, marking the end of an 8-year-old hiding spot option. Different skills cost different amounts of points, and you gain 1 skill point per 1000 XP earned. Skill points are duplicated between the twins, so you could earn 4 points as Jacob, and Evie will also get 4 points to spend separately. You unlock skills individually for each character, which I felt was a bit pointless, as I'm never going to remember which identical skill I've unlocked for which sibling. So I feel like you should just have one tree that unlocks skills for both of them. That just seems easier to me. As characters, Evie is supposed to be the calculated, sneaky one, and Jacob is supposed to be the dumb muscle. In practice, they both control in exactly the same way, and neither of them have any advantages over the other in any given situation. I mean, at the top level, Evie can turn invisible when she stands still, but other than a smattering of top level skill unlocks, there's no real advantage to playing as one over the other. You now level up by spending a certain amount of skill points, rather than in Unity where your equipment denoted your level, with outfits now providing extra health, reducing damage, or increasing carry capacities. You will need to upgrade your weapons as you progress because of those negative changes to combat that I promised I'd talk about. See, you didn't have to wait long for the negative stuff. After my first session with this game, I had to check whether the gameplay was tied to the frame rate, as I thought maybe by playing it at 60 FPS I was seeing the combat at double speed. It turns out this is not an original thought, and people were asking this question 8 years ago. The combat is so fast that it lost all impact for me. The execution animations are still gloriously over the top, but it all happens so quickly it's often like trying to follow a ball under a cup. Later on you can unlock a gun execution, where you knock a baddie down, point a gun in their face and blow their brains out. I found this to be the most impactful because they actually pause for a beat. You knock them down, point the gun at their head, and then wait for a moment until they turn around to face their fate. It felt impactful because it slowed down for just that split second to let you see what's going on. The high speed of the combat means that the weapons have very little weight to them, and I found no notable differences between either the kukri, cane swords, or brass knuckles. While the combat mechanics, such as parrying and dodging gunfire, is much improved here over Unity, the actual fighting and weapon variety is a step back in my opinion. I read in an interview with a developer that having characters wielding giant axes and broadswords wouldn't fit in with the setting due to weapon laws from that period. And that makes sense, and is something I myself have often mocked the series for. A stealth operative walking around a city with a sizable arsenal hanging from their belt is a bit daft, but this feels like we're pulling off that prison shiv scene from Breaking Bad all by ourselves. By the end of the game, my gear and skills were powerful enough to take people down quickly, but there were points where it took me a 20-something hit combo to bring one man in a t-shirt down to a level ready to be killed. Kind of brings a whole historically accurate argument into question for me. You can do small chain kills on people again though, but you have to bring 2 of them down to a stunned level and then execute them. These probably look very cool if you can figure out what's happening, but this was something else that I struggled to pull off reliably, and it seemed arbitrary as to whether the animation would trigger or not. They also reverted Eagle Vision back to its traditional functionality, and we can once more tag enemies, once again making Unity seem like a horrible mistake that they wanted to correct. That said, microtransactions do return here, but they are significantly more toned down than Unity, and I honestly forgot they were here, which is how it should be. There are 2 currencies in this game, pound sterling and helix credits, and I forgot all about the helix credits until about 2/3 of the way through the game when it told me I had enough to buy more pounds. I didn't need it though, as money is much easier to come by than the last game, but not so much as to make buying upgrades a frivolous decision, which I think is the ideal balance for this sort of upgrade system. With your gang come gang upgrades, and you soon get access to a train that you use as your base. The train has a safe which, much like the system introduced in Ezio's Villa, generates money over time for you to collect at regular intervals, and you can increase the amount of money generated by purchasing certain gang upgrades. These upgrades also require materials as well, which come from chests, mission rewards, and for stealing supply wagons across the map. Gang upgrades can also alter London itself, from increasing the amount of hanging barrels to drop on people, sabotaging enemy wagons, and improving your gang members. Money can initially be a bit more difficult to come by, but it gets easier as you progress, which fits in nicely with the idea that you are slowly gaining influence over the city. Liberating city districts is the next step in the evolution of the mechanic arguably introduced in Brotherhood, which has since made its way into the Ubisoft standard open world mechanics checklist. We had the Borgia and Templar towers in Brotherhood and Revelations, which morphed into fortresses in Black Flag and Rogue, and then disappeared for Unity. Here though, we have a city split up into 9 boroughs, with each borough being split into different districts. Each district contains a mission, which could be eliminating a Templar, capturing a criminal for questioning, or liberating little kiddlywinks from their hazardous work environments. Completing these missions liberates the districts, and once you liberate all the districts, you trigger a gang war with the resident gang leader and their cronies. Win this fight and the remaining members swear loyalty to you, which to be honest doesn't seem like the kind of loyalty you would be looking for, seeing how easily they just swore to work for you. Plus, I want to know who this guy is. He seems to mediate and schedule gang wars across the city. Who is this man? Where's his DLC story? I do like this kind of liberation structure in games, as it gives me something to keep the voices in my head quiet when I want to take a break from the story missions. Unfortunately, these activities tend to not develop over time. For example, all the child liberation missions are in tool factories with very similar layouts. The capture missions always result in a cart chase through the streets, which I found infuriating because more enemies would always spawn in just as I'm about to become anonymous. Which leads me to another complaint. I found it very unclear whether I was anonymous or not. Your minimap goes red when people are chasing you, sure, easy, but then the red goes away and you just kind of have to guess whether or not you're anonymous again. Maybe I'm missing something, but I often found myself just standing on mission spots until the game decided I was anonymous again and let me turn in the objective. One minor addition to this game that I am very much in favour of is adding bonus rewards for completing bonus objectives. I have never been motivated by achievements, and the promise of unlocking something for 100% completing a game has never made any sense to me, because by that point I've done it all, so what am I going to do with this Altair costume? But giving me more money and XP for completing optional objectives? Yes please, that will do nicely. One thing I feel I must mention, because it's pretty significant and I would have missed it if I didn't randomly get suggested a 7-year-old YouTube video, is that there is a whole memory sequence almost hidden from you. There's an icon on the far right hand side of the map in the middle of the river, and it's a portal to a sequence where you play as the Frye twins' granddaughter during World War I, working with Winston Churchill to take down Zeppelins and eliminate Templars. In practice, this functions as another borough to liberate, but with a different aesthetic, and I do feel like it was maybe included because someone got excited about working on a London game and created a 3D model of Tower Bridge, only to be told that it hadn't been built during this time period, so they just shoved it into an optional area. More importantly though, this section features Juno interactions, where she confirms my suspicions that sages are descendants of her husband, as she talked about in AC3, and she is the source of the first mention of her species name, the Isu, in the series. Unless they mention it in an email in Black Flag or something, this is fairly important stuff, and it seems odd that they would almost hide this area away from people. Syndicate also sees the return of my favourite addition to Unity, what I call the Hitman Levels. Assassination missions set in a large area with multiple points of entry and multiple methods of reaching your target. You could swap places with the cadaver and surprise your target, or release a load of trap guards to help you fight your way into the building. Like I said in my Unity video, I've been wishing for this sort of thing in the series since the first game, and there are more of them here with generally a wider range of approach options. It's a shame that they don't return in future games, but I'm hoping Mirage will bring these back too. Which brings us to arguably the biggest addition to this game, the Grappling Hook. I felt like this was an odd addition when I first heard about it, and in many ways I still do. One of the big selling points of the entire series so far has been your ability to clamber all over buildings and engage in parkour chase sequences throughout history. Here they gave us a tool that allows you to bypass all of that and just zip over the streets or up to the rooftops like Batman in a duster. While I do think it's an odd addition, it is at least a fun one. Being able to zip up and away out of trouble felt pretty good, and you can use it to enable some aerial kills in open spaces. Unfortunately, it has similar tendencies to the base parkour system, in that it will very often zip you up anywhere except where you want it to go. It does also make traversing Victorian London a bit easier, as there are plenty of wide open streets to traverse, but I feel that this is where my issues with this mechanic lie. I feel like the grappling hook was introduced to solve a problem, and that problem was the setting. As I say, London has plenty of wide open streets, which in any other game in the series would force you to jump down to the street and climb back up again. Yes, this gadget solves that problem, but it's a problem that they have created for themselves in the name of historical accuracy. This being the historical accuracy where a pair of siblings can massacre 30 people every afternoon and not develop some sort of complex. In my mind, I've been comparing the grappling hook to the hook blade from Revelations. That gave you more traversal options, and the city was partially designed around it. Large sections of Constantinople are on a slope, providing plenty of opportunity to dash across the rooftops, swinging from hanging baskets and sliding down zip lines. Constantinople still holds one of my top spots in terms of Assassin's Creed cities, and this is a big part of the reason why. London was clearly not designed with the grappling hook in mind, and it was instead added to stop the parkour, again one of the biggest draws of the series, from getting annoying. That's not to say that they necessarily had to redesign the entire city around one, admittedly optional, gadget. In contrast, let's look at the Thames. London has a whopping great big river snaking right through the middle of it, an obstacle too great for many taxi drivers to this day. Yes, there are bridges, but that's just an extended length of featureless stone. Instead, they filled the river with boats moving cargo around, creating a constantly moving assault course for you to navigate. This is a fun way to overcome the parkour problem that played into the strengths of the series. Then again, I guess you can ignore it completely once you've unlocked fast travel, but where's the fun in that? The only other thing that really stood out to me here was the music, and I guess the tone in general. The developers are keen for us to accept the Frye twins as a pair of lovable scamps, and the music goes some way to try and emphasise this. Not just during cutscenes though, but during missions or when you are out and about in the world. My personal issue with this, and obviously this is incredibly subjective, is that it's all too jovial considering the circumstances. I've just executed a man with a bullet to the head after gouging out his chest 13 times before murdering all of his friends and the garrison of police that came to investigate. I mean seriously, the fights can escalate incredibly quickly. Why does the music give the air of me having just successfully stolen a loaf of bread from my school's head teacher? Assassin's Creed has almost always had light-hearted and outright funny moments in it, so including some here isn't an issue in itself. But this feels like it's trying too hard and too often. Maybe this was done in reaction to Arno being about as charismatic as a damp onion? Sometimes the cutscenes feel like a 90s sitcom with a laugh track removed, giving time between lines to let you finish laughing at Jacob's hilarious jokes and Evie's exhaustion in his cheeky ways. Which I think is all there is to say about Assassin's Creed Syndicate. It certainly was better than I expected, and I reckon I probably would have enjoyed it had I bought it on release. And in that alternate dimension, I may very well have gone on to play the next 3 games too, who knows? Anyway, I guess it's time to put this somewhere on my ranking list. This is certainly better than Unity, and is most definitely more worthy of your money than Freedom Cry. The next contender is Assassin's Creed 1. I said in that video that AC1 is a proof of concept, a core framework on which to add new features moving forward. Syndicate feels like the soft reboot that I think Unity was supposed to be, and in terms of jank, feels about the same as AC1, but with a more visually interesting city to explore and better animations thanks to improved hardware. I don't think it's a stretch to describe AC1 as a linear game set in an open world, whereas Syndicate gives you plenty to do in its vast and detailed playground between stabbing missions. even if your progression through the world is arguably linear thanks to the level system, but I'll save that rant for the next video. With all of that said, I think that this game is superior to the first, even if my nostalgia hates me for suggesting such a thing. But I would argue 3 repeatable mundane side missions is much worse than the range of side activities on offer here, and the cutscenes are once again beautifully animated and very well voiced, something I think the series doesn't get enough credit for. Right, with a large chunk of Assassin's Creed fans now furiously typing about how much of a wanker I am for that ranking, we can look forward to Assassin's Creed Origin. Luckily, we won't have to wait 2 years to play it, but I am already trying to get myself in a different mindset for this one. I've been warned that if I go into it expecting another Assassin's Creed game, then I'm going to be disappointed. So I've prepared myself for something more akin to The Witcher, but with a weird parallel modern story thrown in as well. I'm streaming my playthrough of the entire series over on Twitch, so please do come and tell me how underappreciated Syndicate really is, and that I really need to stop talking shit about Unity. Or just leave a comment on this video and I'll skim read it while I'm having a poo, whichever you prefer.
London will perish without me.
You flatter yourself.
I would have created a paradise.
The city belongs to the people. You are but one man.
I am at the very top of the Order!
You were, Mr. Starrick.
You were.